Music theory using Microsoft Excel. Chords named by mode and modal half steps, this time building chords from the Locrian mode, basically building Locrian chords. So get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin'. And if you think you can excel at rockin' without Microsoft Excel, you can't because you're missing the Excel part of the rockin'. You're just rocking without excelling. And so that's what we'll use Microsoft. We are in Microsoft Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just continue constructing as we go. If you do have access to this workbook though, 4 tabs down below. Fretboard, example, practice blank, the fretboard tab having a simulated fretboard that we will refer back to. The example tab having the finished product, in essence, the answer key. The practice tab has pre-formatted cells, so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay because we'll be working in the blank tab where we built this from a blank worksheet and we'll continue to build it in the blank part of the worksheet, practicing both our Excel skills and our music theory skills at the same time, remembering that those two things are actually one and the same. Most people don't know that, but I'm here to tell you, now you know it. So let's go on over to the fretboard. We're thinking about how we can put together chords in the most clean fashion possible, also being able to bridge those chords into the current naming construction for better communication and to give better understanding of the process. So we're going to go through our analogy, the analogy being that the fretboard is the map of our territory, like the globe. There are 7 locations that are destinations on the globe as well as our fretboard. Now there's actually 12 locations, but the non-destination locations, we're saying those are like the oceans. You might hit on them, you might be in them, but you don't want to be stuck there because then the sharks eat you. So then you go off of them and you go on to the continents, of which there are only 7. If we take our perspective from space, like us looking down on the fretboard, we could see that the fretboard world rotates around. It's not flat. It's not flat. It rotates. It rotates. And we're going to imagine that there's 12 different perspectives we're looking at from our point in space, our head above the guitar. And we name those 1 through 12, or the letters of the musical alphabet. Once we determine our vantage point by using the letters of the alphabet, like the C, number 4, the C, then I'm going to locate the continents based on the permanent naming construction, which is the mode names or the Nashville number system, the 1, the 3, the 5. So if this whole shape, if the whole globe shifted to C sharp, then I would just say, okay, now I'm on C sharp. The 7 continents are now looking different because I'm at a different perspective, but all the continents once shifted have the same names. I'm not going to name them by the notes. And when I'm building stuff within this shape, I don't want to rename the shapes as I have different focal points. If I'm over here focused on the US, let's say, and then I move over here to Europe, let's say, I don't want to rename Europe the US and the US Europe. That's basically what we do with the scale degree system. So what we're trying to do is be able to convert and think about the scale degree system, but also see how it's really going to confuse you. And you'd like to learn it kind of like the most clean way possible, using all the movable capacity that is on the guitar, which is the beauty of the guitar. We want to make sure that we maximize the movability of an instrument that is completely symmetrical, unlike a piano, although all this stuff still kind of applies to the piano, but the guitar in particular, completely symmetrical. Let's maximize the usage of that. And that means that some of the terminology, we have to see how it's going to pigeonhole us into thinking certain ways, like a sneaky lawyer telling me how many times a day you beat your dog. And then they don't let you say, I don't know. It's a yes or no. You have to give me a number. No, I don't have to give you a number because the way you're saying stuff isn't how it is. That's not how it is. So you deal with sneaky lawyer, sneaky car dealership. So then you just have to know that the terminology they're using, is going to pull you out of the most clean system that we would like to do. Similarly with the chord constructions, because the chord constructions don't even they pretend modes don't exist. It's like women's, high school baseball these days. They pretend women don't exist, right? Well, and you're like, what happened here? How are we supposed to figure things out if you eliminate the modes, right? That doesn't work. So what we need to do is we need to recognize the modes, and then everything becomes much more clean. And it really becomes apparent with the Locrian mode, because that's the crazy mode. So they kind of pigeonholed everything into the current naming structure, the way it happened historically, which kind of worked. And then they jammed in the 7 chords, which is the Mixolydian mode. But the Locrian mode is all wacky. So the current naming structure doesn't work at all. But if you just use the mode system, it would be really easy. And you might say, well, what does it matter? We don't need the Locrian mode. But you do need the Locrian mode, because you're going to build a Locrian chord, because you need the tension chord to go back to the 1. So it's an important chord. You don't want to just skip the note of the Locrian or the chord. So even though you might not play in Locrian, you certainly might build chords in it. All right. That said, let's go on over to our blank tab. So we did this for the Ionian. So you will recall for our numbering system, the 1, 4, 5 are basically like the major modes. And then the 2, 3, and 6 are like the minor modes. And then we got the crazy Locrian. The crazy Locrian. All right, no one plays in the crazy Locrian. You just leave that guy alone. But it does have a chord, so it does have its usages. So we need to know it. So what is the crazy Locrian? It's kind of like the mix. It's kind of like a minor mode, because it has a minor third, and then it has a flat fifth. We'll get into the intervals later, but that flat fifth gives a lot of tension, because it's crazy. The loco guy comes into the room and everybody's like, oh man, there's a lot of tension in there. And then you need to release the tension. The loco guy leaves the room and everybody breathes a sigh of relief. That's the tension of the Locrian. You got to have it. You got to have it with the music. All right. So how would we build out the Locrian? So we're going to say it's going to be, the normal name is going to be a B. We could say diminished, or you might use a little diminished symbol, which we'll use in a second, but let's just call it B diminished. Now, with the normal naming construction, you will note, and we'll get into this more later. I'll get into kind of like the history of the naming construction for the normal names. But right now, I really want to focus on the intuitiveness of the modal system, right? How much easier it is. But just to give a general idea on the naming, you can see that we have the majors. That's what we started with, because that was the focus when they started naming the chords, right? And then they added the minors. So then we have the minors. And then they kind of jammed in a whole nother category for 7 chords, which you can't see with a triad. But you will recall that we have these 7 chords that doesn't have a major or minor once you add 4 notes to a chord, if it has a 7 chord. And then you also have this diminished situation. And that's where we are now, which are basically the Locrian chords, which, again, the current system totally falls apart on, basically. So first one, so B diminished is basically like saying, hey, the diminished is going to be like basically saying this is kind of a Locrian chord in essence. All right, so if I go down here and if we go to the Locrian, we're going to say it would be the 1, 3, 5 from a scale degree standpoint. That would be the general construction. Now, it would be easier possibly just to call it a Locrian mode, which I'm going to call an NB2. Why an N? Because I don't want to use an L, because the L looks like an I. So, and I think the Locrian, because we all know it's crazy, we can say it's backwards. We use the last, so I'm going to use the last letter, which is the N, and then it's a note number B. It's a 3-note chord. Why put a 2 there? Because the 2 represents 2 modal whole steps. It's a measurement term from the node that we're on, node Locrian, which happens to be a B in this context. So that means it's a 3-note chord. If that was the root, which it usually would not be if it's in Locrian, but if we wrote a crazy Locrian song, it would be an NB2. Why don't people make a crazy Locrian song? Because once the crazy guy comes in the room, you have to relieve the tension. And then you can't relieve the tension if the tension is your center point, right? But you still need the tension. It's just that it shouldn't be the thing you resolve to. That's the problem with playing a song in Locrian, right? Because you can't resolve to the crazy guy walking in the room. The crazy guy has to walk out of the room so that you resolve the tension. All right, but that still means that the Locrian is useful. You have to have it there. All right, so this is going to be then Locrian is going to be 0 to 4. So that's going to be our distances. We're going to start on 0, which is our 7. And then we're going to go up 2 modal half steps or a modal whole step, and then another 2 modal half steps or a modal whole step, which means it would be 2 from that node and then 4 from that node. What about a scale degree standpoint? If we looked at it from the standpoint of scale degrees, well, the scale degrees are all off by 1 because they messed up the measuring thing. So it would be 1, 3, 5 then. So all of these would be up by 1. All of these would be up by 1 on the 1, 3, 5. So the chord construction would be the 1, 3, 5 if you made the Locrian the 1. I don't want to make it the 1. I want to keep the Locrian the 7 with an absolute numbering system. I don't want to rename the continents in our analogy. Why? Because it's stupid to do that. That's why. If I want to get technical, if I have to give you the technical rationale, doing that would technically be stupid. So no, don't do that. We're going to keep, like if we keep, because look, if we keep that as the 7, this is why. I'll show you. If we keep that as the 7, then we can say that this is going to be 7 plus 2 minus 7, because it can't be greater than 7. So we'd have the Locrian, and then to the 2, which is the Dorian, and then we'd have the 2 plus 2, which would be 4 for the Lydian. And then if I copy this down, we can name it Locrian, Dorian, Lydian. Isn't that nice? So I don't need to name the chord by the notes in it. Why? Because that's not movable. And if it ain't movable on the guitar, I want you to, you could just move on. If it ain't movable, move on with your terminology because it's not the optimal thing. And that's what we do. Maybe that works for the guitar for some reason because of the key, because of the way you finger the guitar. I don't know. But I'm on a symmetrical instrument here. I'm on a symmetrical instrument. I want everything should be movable. And if it's not, you can move off that. Move off if it's not movable. All right. Okay, so what if... All right, so here's where it gets crazy. So now we're saying it's a 4-note chord. Now, before we said it was a diminished chord because the diminished chord says it's a flat 5, and no one has a flat 5. That's what makes it crazy. No one goes flat 5, man. No one goes flat 5. But the diminished, the way they constructed it might apply also to the 7 if you add another note. And they didn't want to do it. So they came up with this term of half diminished. Now we'll get into that the rationale of that later, again, with the current naming structure. I don't want to get in the weeds now. What I want to do right now is just say, this is messy. This is really messy. It's like diminished and then half diminished. You've got different symbologies and whatnot happening, where again, it would be really easy to just call it, it's a Locrian B3, meaning it's a 4-note Locrian chord. Meaning, if you know the 7 continents that you're on, you know the list of notes that you're in, you don't have to say, you could just say, look, just take 4 notes from that node, taking every other note being a nodal whole step, right? Go 2 steps up. So it's going to be start on the B, it's a Locrian, that's the node you're on, and then take 3 modal whole steps up to get the root plus 3 notes, and that's it. See how easy it. This is the easy way to, again, I think there's a conspiracy out there, I'm telling you, with people saying that this is more difficult because it has modes. This is more difficult than that? Like it's diminished and then it's half diminished and then but what does it mean to be diminished? Why don't you just count every other note from the node you're on? That would be the most easy thing to do, wouldn't it? I mean, I feel like that's just painfully obvious. The only reason they don't do that is because the system was jammed together, it seems to me, the way it was jammed together, right? But we don't need to do it that way right now because we can convert. All you have to do is tell ChatGTP, hey, look, this is the system I'm using. Convert it to the other system, right? And they can do so. Anyways, if you add it from a scale degree system, it would be a 1, 3, 5, and then 7, right? A 1, 3, 5, and then a 7. Now, I'm not going to get into why it's diminished and half diminished too much right now. We'll get to that when we get to the intervals, which we can all do in both of these kind of systems. We can do the intervals, but we'll talk about that later when we get to the intervals. Right now, just intuitively noting, how would you build the Locrian in the easiest way? Well, I'd say it's a Locrian mode, and I would just start on that node and then go up 2, and then go up another 2, and then go up another 2 to 4, and then go up another 2 to 6. And that would be it, because I know the 7 notes, and they're like a block. They're in order. You just go around the block, and you stop at every other place around the block, and you have lunch there. You get a something to eat there, and then you go another block. All right. So what about the scale degree system? Well, then they would rename the 1, which it should be a 7, but we're going to call it a 1 then, and then we would just say, okay, it's 1 plus 2. And then 3 plus 2, and then 5 plus 2. So now you got to call it a 1, 3, 5, 7. What's the problem with that? Well, now you renamed the 7 node the 1 node. That's the problem. And I can't, and let me, let me put some borders around this. And I'd like to keep it as the 7, because look how cool it would be if it was the 7. I could name it with a universal naming convention for the actual Locrian chord. I could say, hey, look, this is a 7. And then I'm going to say this is 7 plus 2 minus 7. And this is going to be equal to this plus 2 minus, oh, wait, I don't have to say minus 7 there. And this is going to be this plus 2. And so I could just say this chord is named, it's a 7, 2, 4, 6 chord. If I don't rename the relative positions from a scale degree standpoint, I can give it a universal naming construction based on the numbers of the Nashville numbering system 7, 2, 4, 6, which would have actual names of the Locrian, the Dorian, the Lydian, and the Aeolian. That's movable. That's movable. So I'm not moving on. I'm not moving on from this concept because it's movable. If it's not movable, then you got to move on. But this is movable, so I'm staying still on this because I'm on solid ground because it's movable. Okay, so what if we did a 5-note chord? A 5-note chord. Well, the normal name would be something like this. If it was in the Locrian mode, it would be like a B. I think that's a half diminished, but then it has a flat 9. Now, again, I don't really want to get into all like the weeds on this, but you'll remember that the diminished means it's going to flatten like the 5. That's what they're trying to do. So the distance of the 5 needs to be flattened, but then you also note that the third is actually flattened too. I think that's also what the diminished means, but it's half diminished because the 7 is not flattened. So it's not fully diminished. So you still have like a 7. Wait a second. No, the 7 is flattened. The 7 is flattened. And then you've got the 9. And the 9, 11, and 13 usually stay the same, even though you're flattening like now the 5, the 3, and the 7. So you have to then flatten the 9. See? Does that make perfect sense? No, it's crazy. It's loco. It's loco. Okay. But how would you do it like the easy way? You just call it, hey, it's a Locrian, an NB4 chord. It's a Locrian chord. You start on the Locrian node, and you just skip every other note for 4 notes from the Locrian node to make a 5-note chord. Because you know the 7 notes, you just skip every other note, and you just pick up the nodes that are in the system from there. You can see it shape-wise, right? That would be the easiest way to do it. Now, we can get into the intervals later, comparing the intervals and stuff, but I'm just saying, if you're in the diatonic, you know the naming system's messed up, okay? If you're in the same diatonic key and you have to do some crazy business like this, right? Like this is crazy. You should, the only time you should have to do crazy stuff is when you're outside if you're adding notes out in the ocean, in the non-destination locations. That's the only time when the naming convention should get crazy, okay? It shouldn't be crazy. Even when you're on the crazy Locrian, it should still be easy to name the crazy Locrian. It's not the naming of the crazy guy that makes him crazy, right? It's the flat 5 that makes it crazy. The name, you could still call it. It should be an easy name still, okay? Anyways, let me go back. If we have a 5-note chord from the Locrian, if we have a 5-note, if we used a scale degree system, this would be a 1, this would be a 3, this would be a 5, and this would be a 7, and then the 9. So the 9 is also the 2. So, right, it's also the 2, and you can see it's a flat 2. Well, it's a flat 2. I won't get into that now. That's the distance. We'll get into intervals later. Give one more shot at the logic for the B half diminished 7, which we will get into later when we talk more about the intervals, and then we'll return to our chord naming after that point. But the general idea here is that if it's diminished or if it's half diminished, we're going to assume for the 3rd and for the 7 that it has the same interval as the minors, and then the diminished would drop the 5, which is typically the same for the major and the minors. That's why we need the new category. But it also, for some reason, applies to the 7. So the 7 would then be dropped if it was fully diminished. That's why we have the half diminished situation. Again, my main concern right now is just to say, hey, look, that's messy. It should be a lot easier if we're playing something within the diatonic key. Okay, and so, but I will get into the naming convention later because I'm using scale degrees, which we haven't drilled out fully right now. Now we just want to know intuitively, what kind of works best. So this one, once again, would be a B half diminished. So that would mean that if it's diminished, then the 3rd is going to be minor. It's now half diminished, which means the 5th has now been brought down. And then the 7 would be assumed to be minor, would have been brought down if it was fully diminished, so it's not brought down. And then the 9 is equivalent to the 2 because there's 7 notes in the scale degrees, and then instead of going back to the 2, they went up to the 9. But the 9, even on a minor, even on the Aeolian, is actually a major 2nd. But on the Locrian, it's another crazy thing, which is similar to the Phrygian. It has a flat 2 or flat 9. So now we have to flatten the 9 because for whatever reason, the 9, 11, and 13 are assumed to be on the major intervals, even though the diminished by default assumes the minor intervals for the 3rd and the 7. Okay, this is crazy, all right? I mean, this is crazy. But we should just call it an NB4 if it's in the same diatonic key. It's a Locrian 5-note B. Just start from the B and go up 4 modal whole steps from there, every other note, and that's how you build the chord. So it should be that should be intuitively just makes more sense. I think that's clear. I think that's obvious. If you don't think if you think explaining this to someone is easier than explaining that to someone in terms of just building the chord, I'd like to hear the argument. I'd like to hear the argument because I feel like it'd be something made up by the mainstream of sewage media or something. They have to twist that in knots to figure that one out. It'd be entertaining to hear. I would be entertained to see the effort of trying to make that argument. All right, so let's put this is going to be, wait a sec. If this is the Locrian, then these would all be off by 1. So this would be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So the scale degrees would be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, all off by 1 from a distance terminology. And that's not good because the 1 here makes me change it from the absolute node, which is the 7. So I want to keep this as the 7 is the way I would like to do it. So I'm not going to let the scale degree system force me out of seeing that as the 7 because if I see it as the 7, it'll be a lot easier to move around the fretboard. So I'm going to say if it was the 7, I could build this chord 7 plus 2 minus 7. And then I can say this one is going to be equal to the 2 plus 2. And this is going to be the 4 plus 2. And then I have to say minus 7. Wait a sec, did that work? This is going to be 7, 2, 4. What happened here? This should be plus 2. And then this should be equal to 6 plus 2. And let's bring this down. Minus 7. All right, so that means that we're just going to hold down the 7, 2, 4, 6, 1, which would be the Locrian, Dorian, Lydian, Aeolian, and Ionian nodes to make that chord. Let's make that blue and bordered. All right, let's do the next one. Let's say we have a 6-note chord. Okay, what would we call that? All right, this is going to get ugly. It's going to be a B half diminished 11 flat 9. Okay, why? Well, because the diminished means that the third would be in the minor degree instead of in the major, but that would also mean the 7 is 2, so we have to half diminish it so it doesn't flatten the 7, and then the 11 is there even though there's only 7 scale degrees, because we didn't want to go back to the 2 and the 4, so we went up to the 9 and then to the 11, which we have to know is equivalent to the 2 and the 4 in essence, like pitch-wise. And then, like, we had to add the flat 9 because for whatever reason, even though the diminished is like, means it's the minor scales, that once we get to the 9, 11, and 13, we assume the major intervals, but this one's a minor interval, so we had to flat the 9, but we didn't have to flat the 11 because the 11 is equivalent to the 4, and for whatever reason, even though Locrian is totally crazy, it still has a perfect fourth, which is normal for everything except for the Lydian. So that's why. But it would be a lot easier. It'd be a lot easier to call it an NB5. It would be it's just a Locrian 6-note B chord. It's a B chord, Locrian B chord. Why would that be easier? Because then you just start on the node of the B and count up every other note, which would be 5. The last note included would be 5 nodal whole steps away, and that's how easy it should be. This should not happen. I don't care how crazy. I don't care how crazy Locrian is. I don't care how crazy. You don't have to call him a crazy name. You just say, look, that's the Locrian, and he's crazy. But we're going to keep the name simple. It's not like you have to come up with a name that you can't pronounce just because he's crazy, all right? You say why he's crazy. It's not because of the name. It's because of the flat 5 in particular. Okay, so keep the name simple and then explain why he's crazy, and that's because it's the flat 5. Don't make it like don't make it about the name. Don't make it about the name. That's not important. All right, so then we would say if we do the scale degrees, it would be the 1, 3, 5, 7, and then the 9 is the 2, the 11 is the 4, right? But I don't want to do that because then I'd have to make the 7 the 1. If I kept it as the 7, it would be easier because I could just say, okay, look, this is the 7, and then I can name all of the nodes in the system. We can name all the nodes. So this would be equal to 7 plus 2 minus 7. This would be equal to the 2 plus 2. This would be equal to the 4 plus 2. Oh, wait, it's trying to help me. Don't try to help me. This thing is, you're not helping. 6 plus 2 thinks it's doing something helpful. You're not doing anything helpful. You're making it worse. You're worsening things, Excel, when you try to help like that. Okay. So then, what are the nodes we're going to hold down? It's going to be Locrian, Dorian, Lydian, Aeolian, Ionian, and Phrygian. All right, so there we have it. Boom, let's make that bordered and blue. All right, what's the next one? We're going to go to the crazy Locrian 7-note chord to finish this out. How crazy can we get? We shouldn't have to get crazy on the name, but the current system does because it all falls apart. Locrian makes it fall apart, just crumbles. So I think it's going to go something like this. And again, if you have, this is a diatonic. This is in the same diatonic. It's all the same 7 notes. And look at what happened. Like why, if this, like maybe I got something wrong. I don't think so. Like this is a chord that's in the diatonic key. Doesn't have any notes that are in the ocean outside of the destination locations. And this is how ugly. So let's see. Let me see if I get this right. It's a B half diminished 13 flat 9 flat 13. Why? Well, it's diminished, and that means that it would normally have a flat third and a flat 7, but we don't want a flat. But if we diminish the 7 from the starting point of the minor kind of point, then it would double flatten it. So we have to call it half diminished instead of fully diminished. And then we have to have the 13 because even though there's only 7 scale degrees, we wanted to keep counting up from 7 to 9, 11, and 13, because if we said it was the 2, the 4, and the 6, then those numbers would be lower than like the 7, and then you might not know that you have to include all the other numbers because they're lower than that numbers when you make the chord. And then the 9, which is equivalent to the 2, Locrian has a crazy flat 2, which isn't even what normally happens with the Aeolian, which is kind of the basis of the Locrian thing, where you kind of assume that the 3rd and the 7 are kind of like the minor instead of like the major, but the 2 is still a major second, which is equivalent to the 9. So you have to flatten the 9, which is the 2, and you don't have to flatten the 11 because it does have a perfect 4th, but the 13 does indeed need to be flattened because it's equivalent to the 6. And the 6, although we said it's a diminished, or half diminished, which is similar to the minor intervals, that assumption doesn't apply to the 9, 11, and 13, which are equivalent to the 2, 4, and 6. Therefore, you have to flatten the 13. Okay? So if you follow that? Well, why don't we do it like how? I mean, wouldn't it be easier to call it like a Locrian B like 6 chord? And so you could just say, look, it's a Locrian. It's in the same diatonic key. We're not swimming in the ocean here. We're on the destination locations. Let's just call it a Locrian chord with 6 notes in it, and then you just pick up every other note, every other node from that point. That would be a little easier, I feel like. And so again, I mean, if you want to make the argument that that's not the case, I would love to hear it. I like watching MSNBC and having them make up stories about why things happen in the world. It's like, it's interesting to see how they weave, the webs they weave are like, holy moly. That's like, okay. So what would we do? We take every other note. It would be like, we start on the Locrian 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then 11, and then 13, right? And then the 13 is equivalent to the 6 in a scale degree standpoint. All right. So then let's go back on over. So if we took the modal half steps, we would say, okay, this is going to be the Locrian. And then it would be going 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, or 12. What if we convert it to a scale degree system? Well, then we just start on the 1, and it's all off by 1, right? So what would be the scale degrees? We would have to include the 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, which is equivalent to the 2, the 11 equivalent to the 4, the 13 equivalent to the 6. And so then we're going to say, okay, but I don't want to do the scale degrees. I want to do it because I want to keep the node we're on absolute node number 7. Why? Because I don't need to change the continent name. We already discussed this. I'm going to keep on saying it, though, because people still seem to doubt my integrity on the, or my grasp, possibly both my integrity and my grasp of the situation. And so I feel like I need to reiterate the point on this one because I'm right. And so then we're going to say this is going to be 2 plus 2 minus 7. This is going to be 1 plus 2. And this is going to be 3 plus 2. So, right, so we could just say from a Nashville number system, what do you need to hold down? You can't physically do it on the guitar. You'd have to drop some of these middle notes, right? But I could say, in theory, we'd be holding down the 7, 2, 6, 4, 1, 3, 5 nodes, which align up to the Locrian, Dorian, Lydian, Aeolian, Ionian, Phrygian, Mixolydian. All right. So next time we're going to continue on and think about, all right, this is how we would do it if we're in the context of a song. This is what you'd want to do. You're going to name the chords like the Nashville number system does and say, look, I don't care if I'm playing an Aeolian. I want to name the chords based on the same absolute numbering system, which actually ties into the nodes. And that allows me to actually name the chords based on the number, if you want to do it that way, which is equivalent to naming them on the node, meaning the 1 and the 4 and the 5 are different. I don't need to say it's a 7 chord for the 5 if I just say, no, it is the 5, right? It's a 4-note 5 chord. It's a 4-note Mixolydian chord. It already has a flat 7. I already know that. Why? Because it's the 5. It's the Mixolydian, right? And so that way more contextually useful. But what if you were naming a chord like out of the context of a song, and maybe you don't know all of the intervals, and you're just trying to name a chord that way? Well, you might base it on like the Ionian. That's kind of what we did in class in music. So that would be a system that you could use. You could say, I know the intervals for the Ionian, so I'm going to name all my chords based on that. I'll show you kind of what that would look like next time. And remember, all these systems are valid because you can easily convert the logical language you come up with using ChatGTP or whatever, just to convert, just like you would with a different language. It's completely logical. As long as your system is logical, then it can convert logic to logic easy. It's not even language. It's not language is much more complex than this for ChatGTP, as long as the logic is sound. And the logic of the current system, by the way, is sound. It's just not the cleanest it could be.